Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the University of Baltimore School of Law's UB Law and Focus discussion series. My name is Cooper Garris. I'm a third-year law student and current president of University of Baltimore Students for Public Interest, or UB SPI. On behalf of UB SPI, we would like to welcome all students, faculty, staff, alumni, and friends to our UB Law and Focus webinar, Public Interest and Access to Justice. Public interest law is a broad and diverse field. As our speakers tonight will demonstrate, public interest legal work can take a variety of forms, ranging from rendering pro bono and direct legal services to capacity building and legislative advocacy. While the work can vary from one organization to the next, the core tenets of public interest law are relatively similar. Public interest lawyers seek to use their knowledge of the law as a means of helping the less fortunate and underprivileged obtain equal representation in the justice system. This language is borrowed from UB SPI's mission statement and has been our inspiration to connect law students with public interest opportunities since 1994. For the past 27 years, UB SPI has raised funds to support law students undertaking public interest legal work full-time during the summer. These funds directly support students in the form of fellowships. Past fellows have served at public interest organizations including Free State Justice, Disability Rights Maryland, Tahiri Justice Center, and Project Teal, just to name a few. Fellows have also served in government at placements within the State's Attorney's Office of Maryland, the Office of the Public Defender, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Public interest lawyering has become increasingly vital as the tumultuous events of the past year have continued to expose social disparities and civil inequities. The impact of these inequities have been recognized across the country, but are acutely felt in Baltimore, a place historically stratified along racial, educational, and socioeconomic lines. Many of our fellows will meet these problems head on this summer, and tonight our panelists will unpack some of these issues and how they have worked to address them. At the conclusion of our webinar, we will congratulate the incoming Summer 2021 UB SPI and MLSC Fellows. Their vital work will further UB SPI's goal to create public interest-minded lawyers and help underrepresented individuals secure their rights. Here to moderate the panel discussion is Venerable Professor of Law, Michelle Gilman. Professor Gilman has served as UB SPI's faculty advisor for over 20 years and also serves UB as the director of the Saul Ewing Civil Advocacy Clinic and co-director of the Center on Applied Feminism. In the last academic year, she was a faculty fellow at Data and Society in New York, where she researched the intersection of privacy law, digital technologies, and marginalized communities. Her work centers around public interest law, and we are honored to have her serve as our moderator this evening. Welcome, Professor Gilman.
Thank you, Cooper, for that lovely introduction. Good evening, everyone. I am Michelle Gilman. I have the great pleasure of serving as the faculty advisor to UB SPI. I'm excited to join them tonight, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar, which looks at the public interest and access to justice work of our three alumni panelists, who are three of many UB alums who are leaders in the public interest community. Over the next hour, our panelists will be discussing the most pressing access to justice challenges faced in their work over the past year, what work remains to be done, and what issues they believe will linger into 2021 and beyond. I will be your moderator for this discussion, but we're looking forward to your questions, which you can submit either using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by posting in the chat. That's open for you as well, and we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. This is our final UB Law and Focus webinar for the spring semester. But there'll be more. Our series will resume on July 13th with a look at bad forensics, how faulty evidence leads to wrongful convictions. So be sure to mark your calendars for that. And now for this afternoon's discussion, let me introduce our panelists. Kaylin Young, a 2016 graduate, serves as the Public Policy Director for the American Civil Liberties Union of Maryland. Julianne Tarver graduated from UB Law in 2015 and serves as program counsel at the Legal Services Corporation. Previously, Julianne served as the pro bono program director at the Maryland Legal Aid Bureau. And rounding out our panel is Randy Ames, a 2013 graduate who is an attorney with Disability Rights Maryland. So thank you, panelists, for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to our guests for joining as well. And let's begin our discussion. So, Julianne, let me start with you, and I'm going to pose the same question to all three of you. When you got to UB Law, did you know that you wanted to work in the social justice field? And what steps led you along your career path to the job that you hold now?
Sure. Hi, thank you so much for having me. I started before law school. I kind of had two careers that I was juggling. One, I was working for a member of Congress on Capitol Hill, and the other, I was a sideline reporter for CBS Sports. So I kind of had two very different worlds that I was in. And I really liked helping people more than I liked being on TV. So I did the switch, and I always say I had a dream job with CBS Sports, but it just wasn't my dream. So I went to law school specifically to work at Maryland Legal Aid. I heard that UB had a fellowship, a public interest fellowship. So I went to UB to get that fellowship, and I was really happy when I did receive that. I did work at Maryland Legal Aid and loved it. I was a staff attorney. I represented people in family law matters. And when the opportunity presented itself to go into the pro bono world at Maryland Legal Aid, I had to do it. And mostly because we were denying so many clients attorneys because we just don't have the capacity to represent everyone. So when you start to reach into the pro bono world, now you can expand that access to justice by applying, having more attorneys work with these clients. So that was absolutely wonderful. And then the move to the Legal Services Corporation, which also is a funder of Maryland Legal Aid, it allows me to expand that arm of access to justice to 132 grantees that are all legal aids across the country, including the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. So now I get to see how all of these other organizations are really being able to help people on different matters. And also I get to be a part of that. So that really is the reason why I'm at Legal Services Corporation now.
And we're all very lucky to have you there. Randy, let me turn to you with the same question. When you got to UB, was this the path? Did you know in your heart? How'd you get to Disability Rights Maryland?
Thanks, Professor Gilman. And thank you again, UB, for having us and hosting us today. So similar to Julianne, when I started at UB, I knew I wanted to get into public interest and social justice issues. But my joke is always, I spent 3 years figuring out what I didn't want to do. I had a lot of great experiences, but kind of had those experiences and realized they weren't the right fit. So I was fortunate enough to be placed in a volunteer position with the Maryland Medicaid program through the Office of the Attorney General after my clerkship. And through that experience, I got a real insight into the need for expanding services and access to public benefits. And from there, I actually joined Legal Aid, where I worked with Julianne and had the pleasure of working on the same floor as her and seeing her rise to the pro bono director with Legal Aid. So another part of this work is you'll find that it is a small community. There's a lot of people who work in the nonprofit field, but especially the more you work in it, you will see a lot of familiar faces. So at Legal Aid, I was with the Long-Term Care Assistance Project, which dealt with access to Medicaid services and nursing home residents facing discharge, involuntary discharge. And from there, I gained a lot of experience. And from there, I realized I wanted an opportunity to work on more systemic issues. And that's what led me to work to make the move to Disability Rights Maryland. My first year with DRM, I was a housing attorney. It was great work. It just wasn't the right fit for me. So I was fortunate enough to be able to move over to our developmental disabilities and healthcare team. And that's where I'm at now, doing some of the same work that I was doing at Legal Aid, but focusing more on systemic litigation opportunities.
Wonderful. And we'll hear more about your work in the coming hour. Kaylin, let me turn to you.
Yeah, coming to UB, I knew that I did want to do legislation. Didn't know where I wanted to do legislation. Of course, growing up and being really interested in, politics and watching MSNBC, et cetera, I always thought I would want to work in Congress. Well, I was able to get an internship thanks to Dean Weiss with Senator Cory Booker. And let me tell you, this was during the Do Nothing Congress of the late Obama years, and I hated it. And compare and contrast that to the Maryland General Assembly, which is really where I got my first internship prior to law school, which is a very fast-paced 90 days. And so coming out of law school, I was able to get a job here at the ACLU as Public Policy Counsel. And that really exposed me on that level as a lobbyist to this work. Left here actually and went into Baltimore City Council under then Council President Brandon Scott as his legislative director, helped move the city council forward and handling the legislative matters there for about 2 years. And then just came back just last year back to the ACLU, and really at a really critical time where we're going to talk about some of the police reform work that we were able to do this year.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's a great segue to where I wanted to go next. So as practicing lawyers in the public interest, all of us are now practicing at a very pivotal time, both because of the COVID pandemic, which is profoundly affecting everyone, but most harshly our clients, and also the racial justice movement that really gained momentum this summer and highlighted issues that are so long-standing, but I think now it's fair to say more Americans understand what Black and Brown people in the United States face as a result of that movement. So I want to address each one in turn. And so Caitlin, I'll start with you, because you were just talking about your work in the General Assembly. So starting with Black Lives Matter and the racial justice movement, how has it impacted your work and your goals with the ACLU of Maryland?
That's a great question. And when I think about some of the work that I did, I told you I started at the ACLU, left and came back. A few years ago, we were working on a lot of these issues, repealing the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, trying to set a statewide use of force standard, et cetera. But there was really not enough political capital and political motivation to get that done, even a few years ago, post Freddie Gray. But however, in the last year and a half in particular, we've seen, national protests across the country. We've seen coalitions being built here in Maryland, and that has pushed the politics in a different way. We've seen also some different political leadership in the General Assembly that's also had a different point of view. And that's created the atmosphere where a lot of these reforms have been able to come to pass finally. And so we've seen, as you all may know, over the last week, the General Assembly passed historic police reform, accomplishing a lot of those goals that we've had for almost a decade. And now we're actually at a point where we're assessing not only what we have now and how we're going to implement those changes, but then again, reassessing what those goals are going to be moving forward. Now that we've crossed the finish line on a few of these things, what then can we do, and what now is needed moving forward in this space to continue to keep the ball rolling?
Thank you for your hard work on these issues. I know we're very fortunate to have Galen join us, because the General Assembly just ended its session days ago and he should be napping, but instead he's here with us. So we are grateful. So Randy, let me turn to you in terms of the racial justice movement and how it intersects with the disability rights movement. How are you viewing those issues and working on them with your own clients and in your own work?
Yeah, so our team at DRM, we address a number of legal issues and have a very broad kind of advocacy plan. So, we try to do systemic litigation as well as working with advocacy groups and forming coalitions. So we are, as an office, a part of a number of stakeholder and advisory groups. In particular, our education work and our housing work in particular focus on decriminalizing disability. So the cross section of people with disabilities who are twice as likely to be living under the federal poverty limit, they're twice as likely as their non-disabled counterparts. So we're looking at lower income individuals who are disabled, as well as the interplay of race and lack of resources to certain communities, whether it's access to healthcare, access to education, and accessible education. And I think the past year, both the rate of underserved communities contracting COVID, as well as facing lack of access of a real education, facing issues related to housing and losing housing due to the pandemic. All of those kind of have formed our work in trying to address some of these systemic issues that we see that the past year has brought to light, that we were already working on and just kind of brought it to a lot of other people's the forefront of their mind, and also looking forward and trying to see the best way that we can address it through legislative action, as well as some of our coalition building.
Right. It's very exciting to hear about your work, which is systemic in nature. So not just representing one individual client at a time, but trying to change the very structures and systems that sometimes can oppress people and overlook their needs. It's a wonderful perspective. Julianne, let me turn to you. How is the Legal Services Corporation and the Legal Aid Bureau of Maryland incorporating the insights of the racial justice movement into their own work?
Hi, so I'm proud to say that especially at Maryland Legal Aid, they're very community focused. So they're out in the community constantly with a lot of different programs. So although I do not work there anymore, I can say that they are still doing that great work and helping people. Expungements, criminal record expungements is so necessary. And just today I was in a meeting where we heard that national large law firms are now going into different neighborhoods where you see the uprising, and you see people who are just so upset of being hurt. They're sick of being hurt and they just need somebody to care and assist them. And did I freeze? I'm going to keep going. So they need somebody there to help them. And when this happens, the firms are now going in there in convention centers and are trying to assist these individuals constantly. They're trying to do these expungement clinics, and they're trying to assist. What just happened?
Julianne, you are frozen, but we can hear you fantastically.
Okay. I was like, what just happened?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Then I will continue. So these firms have now gone into these neighborhoods and they are starting to do these large expungement clinics. They're renting out convention centers and places where the public can access it. And they're staying there for weeks on time to expunge not only adult criminal records, but in some places, even juvenile records. And what this does is it gives people a fresh start. It allows them the ability to kind of come back and start their lives over again, get a job, get housing, stabilize their lives. And we're really proud to see that movement, and we hope it continues.
That's a great example. We also do a lot of expungement work here at the Civil Advocacy Clinic, and it really does give people a fresh start. It's very exciting because it doesn't necessarily take a lot of time to get the expungement process started. It's a great pro bono practice for an attorney, but the impact is so profound. Okay, so I want to switch gears a little, and I'll start with Randy, and you already touched on this a little bit, and focus on how has COVID impacted your clients and your work. I know that right now a lot of people are getting vaccinated, and we're hoping that we're at the beginning of the end, right? And that we will move through this. And of course we will move through it. But I know, for example, with my own clients in the clinic, while there may be a rental moratorium in effect for our tenant clients, that doesn't erase debt. It's just pushing it off into the future. So even as the public health emergency recedes, we're expecting an eviction tsunami to be coming in the coming months. So I do think it's important for people to realize the harms of the pandemic may end sooner for some populations than others. And so I'd be interested, Randy, what you're seeing within the disability rights community.
Yep, thank you. So I want to kind of talk about the pandemic and looking forward from a healthcare perspective and a housing perspective. So, with the healthcare work that we do, we have advocates go into nursing facilities, psychiatric facilities, and even prisons, and dealing with people with advocating on behalf of people with disabilities for deinstitutionalization, appropriate care, and ensure that they're, investigating issues of abuse and neglect. And the pandemic really turned that entire world upside down. Not being able to access clients, having to kind of think of new and unique ways to even, get case referrals or speak to clients, but then also trying to continue to advocate for things like ensuring that people with disabilities have support visitors. When many facilities were completely locked down essentially for visitation, we continued our work to ensure that people who needed support visitors to be able to understand the care that they were receiving, or effectively participate in their plans of care to ensure that those visitations were still happening, and as well as just access to care. So expanding telehealth services. We testified on a bill that luckily passed this session on expansion of telehealth services. So, from the healthcare perspective, moving that forward and even continuing on our work, one of the projects that I oversee are the Sunshine Folk, which are peer advocates that go into nursing facilities and educate nursing facility residents on their ability to discharge with home and community-based services. And they're telling me month after month these stories about nursing facility residents who have been essentially isolated for the past year and really need some serious counseling and trauma-informed counseling, because they've experienced a completely different world from us, where I've had the luxury of being able to isolate in my own home and see my family. Some residents who haven't had access to phones, haven't had access to visitors, and have had their roommates pass of COVID and have, really experienced a traumatic year. And moving forward and ensuring that people access vaccines, that visitation rights expand. So one issue that Disability Rights Maryland has focused on is vaccine access. And we partnered with the ARC of Maryland in bringing a complaint against 6 counties that were not following Maryland guidelines and giving people with disabilities priority in getting the vaccine. So luckily we were we were joking that it was literally the fastest settlement we've ever had. We brought this claim and within 10 days settled with all 6 counties. So that's some of our healthcare work. Turning to housing, we've seen with the eviction moratoriums, as you mentioned, Professor Gilman, this is just a delay of the inevitable. Folks who were unable to pay their rent, who have been unable to, maintain their voucher, who are facing losing it once a lot of these moratoriums are lifted. DRM is actually, we have a 2-year grant funded position that has recently been posted for a housing attorney to complete their entire work is going to be focusing on COVID related housing matters. So, our housing team has been working on these issues, doing outreach and education as the moratoriums go on, but also now we're trying to invest because we know this issue is going to continue and we see it going forward.
That's great work. And it's exciting to hear that there's a position available. So audience members, take notes, spread the word. All right, Caitlin, let me turn to you. How are you thinking about the pandemic? Is it impacting the ACLU's agenda in any way now or going forward? What are your thoughts about that?
The pandemic has really changed how we do work and legislation over the past year and a half, 2 years. Well, really year and a half. Last year, when I was with Council President Scott, it was right when the pandemic took shape, and we had to very quickly transition the City Council to continue to do its work from in-person council meetings into creating a system and where folks can do everything virtually. This included making sure that the council was trained, making sure that the staff was trained, all the back office people, making sure that the public would be able to have access because we're governed by the Open Meetings Act. And then, so that was then in the City Council, and then we translate over here to the Maryland General Assembly. we all know that the General Assembly is a very fast-paced 90 days in Annapolis. And that kind of is what makes the General Assembly what it is being in Annapolis and running into legislators, catching them as they're going to committee or going to the floor so you can lobby them, walking up into their offices. None of that was available this year. I will give a little bit of kudos, though, to the leadership of the General Assembly to having transitioned the entire session online. We were, I was here, right here with the same background, testifying on bills throughout session and having different virtual meetings. And so it still felt like session, but it didn't feel like session at the same time. So moving forward, I think that one of the things, the ACLU is of course about open government and making sure that there's transparency. So we're going to be trying to push the legislature to maintain that type of access. We also saw a significant increase in how those individuals that we work with are able to participate because they can do it from their home, they could do it from their phone. And so this creates a significant opportunity that we just don't want to lose. You don't want to go backwards now. And so that's going to be a focus moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. Transparency is such an important value, so foundational to democracy. So it's wonderful that you're working so hard on that. Julianne, welcome back. Nice to see you, not frozen. So what we were talking about, and I'd love your insights on this, is how is the pandemic impacting, reshaping what the Legal Services Corporation is thinking about now and going forward?
Yeah, so everything is virtual, and we are now trying to figure out, should we encourage this to keep this going? Because we offer a lot of grants for technology. So some organizations did not have, for example, there was an organization that every time it rained, their phone system went out. And so that's a huge issue, especially if you're trying to work virtually, right? You need to make sure that everything works and that your clients also can access it while it's remote. So there's a lot of things to consider here. You have to consider whether or not the courts will be able to allow this, but also is it safe for the clients for domestic violence cases or family law cases? When you're talking about low income individuals, often a family law case now you can see everything in the background. So now it's like a home visit on top of your normal court case. And that has caused a lot of issues. So there's just way more to consider. And I don't think that any organization yet has fully decided how they will be handling this moving forward. There's a part of that convenience of having, you don't have to find childcare, you don't have to travel somewhere, that's nice. But also, do you have internet that works? For example, I had an issue. So anyone can have an issue with this. And it's not great for low income individuals to be able to try to find something that stabilizes them just to be able to access the justice system. So there's a lot of things that we're considering, and a lot of organizations are really evaluating that nationwide.
Absolutely. I know the digital divide has been a barrier for many clinic clients who just don't have access to broadband or don't have access to the hardware, the devices that would allow them to engage with their lawyers or the judicial system in a meaningful way. So, okay, we have a great question in the Q&A from Professor Jamie Lee that I'm going to pose to you. And Kaylin, I'll start with you this time. She says she's curious what you all see as the biggest obstacles to pursuing public interest careers today, and what helped you overcome those obstacles to pursue what sounds like your dream jobs that are so fulfilling.
Well, I think that the main thing that everyone watching should do is, we talk about networking a lot, and with public interest jobs, indeed, you want to be able to, have your resume tight and everything like that, but you also want to be involved in a significant way as best you can prior to graduation. If you're able to demonstrate, that type of civic engagement, at least as it pertains to legislation and public policy on issues, that's going to really stand out. And then indeed, if you are also already building those relationships, if you were interested in legislation and you're already building those relationships with legislators and executives, that's going to really help you get through. And I think that's part of how, what was able to help me get to where I am today. I mean, I think about when I first interviewed or applied at the ACLU. I mean, I didn't know anybody that had worked here, but my supervisor at the time, or the previous public policy director, did, however, know certain legislators that I used and leveraged as references for the opportunity. And so that's what I think can help you stand out. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be a legislator, of course, it can be anybody. But being able to do that, and then of course demonstrating that work that you may already be involved in, even on campus, can really be helpful.
That's such good advice to start building your networks now and not waiting until graduation. And UB Spy is such a great organization in helping students build those contexts. Randy, let me turn to you. What are the obstacles you see to people pursuing this path? How did you overcome them? How do you see your colleagues overcoming them? What advice do you have for our students?
To kind of expand on what Kayla mentioned, it's exactly about networking. It's also, I felt it was hard of kind of, you don't know what you don't know, right? So while you may have experience with, an expungement clinic, you may not have that next level of, well, what does this look like other than being a prosecutor or defense attorney, kind of looking at things kind of in a more, just kind of seeing it in one line or one trajectory. So I think it's being willing, being a steward of your school, of the University of Baltimore, and putting yourself out there and making yourself available and becoming part of the community. So for myself, I clerked with a judge in Baltimore City. From that, I was kind of unsure. I wasn't sure where I wanted to end up. And she kind of, connected me with a few different people to do informational interviews. And I was lucky enough to meet a staff attorney at Maryland Legal Aid, who gave me a lot of great advice of putting myself out there, making myself available. I volunteered for several pro bono clinics, and that led to me kind of meeting people at Legal Aid and then applying for positions there. So don't get discouraged. The nonprofit world, again, once you realize what's out there and kind of have a better sense of what your interests are, there are people out there who want to help you. So being involved in your community, wherever you may live, whether it's Baltimore City or outside of the city in another county. For myself, for example, even now as a staff attorney at DRM, I wanted to be part of a Medicaid subcommittee, and my litigation director was like, "Well, Randy, we'll bring you in to do the meeting minutes because nobody wants to be the note taker." And we use that as a way to say, oh, well, Randy's here and she has Medicaid experience. So whether it's volunteering your time to get your foot in the door, it's really, I think that's the best way of networking and putting yourself out there, and just not being afraid to make an ask. People are out there, they want to talk about their experiences. I've always found people being in the nonprofit world are very generous with their time.
I have definitely found that as well. It's a tight-knit community, as you all indicated earlier, and we're all in it together. We're all fighting for justice. Julianne, what are your thoughts? I know a lot of students are worried, can I afford this? Will I be working to, midnight and on the weekends? Will I have a work-life balance if I commit myself to social justice? So I know these are things they tell me they're worried about. What are your thoughts?
I see Kaylin laughing. So it's true. You do not get paid as much as maybe at other places, but I think there's a balance that you have to think about. So if you are at a smaller firm or maybe even a medium-sized firm and you're making a certain amount of money, you are paying, and you have student loans, you're paying back all of your loans, versus if you're in the public interest world, you have 10 years and then that public interest loan forgiveness kicks in. So there's some different ways you have to look at kind of your pay and evaluate it. I have been through that many times, but what I will say is there's a lot of different legal aid organizations, and each of them kind of have a different culture and a different even pay scale to them. So you can kind of evaluate that and see what works best for you. But I will say there's a lot of grants. There's a lot of different, came in through a fellowship, which assisted mine. I know LSC, Legal Services Corporation, has a loan forgiveness program that they provide to attorneys that are doing public interest work. There's a lot of different ways that you can get assistance with this. So I wouldn't let the pay discourage you. I'll say we've been there, we've all done it together. And it's just, It's possible. You will survive. You can still own a home. You can still do everything that you were looking to do. It just might take a little bit longer, but it will all come together. I promise. We've all done it.
That's great advice. There really are a lot of loan repayment programs and grants and fellowships, and LCDO is a great way for our students to learn more about that, definitely. Okay, so I have a related question. The current UB SPY students asked me to ask you all, they don't want to wait till they graduate to start working for social justice. They want to do now. So they would like your advice on what sort of opportunities and steps can they take now while they are still in law school to work towards equal justice. So obviously one answer I have is take a clinic. We have 11 different clinics in substantive areas, or do an externship with one of these amazing organizations. You know, there are ways to get work experience in those areas, but there are other ways to work towards access to justice as a law student. So Julianne, let me start with you on that, an area where you definitely have expertise.
Sure. So I will start off with the paid opportunities. A lot of these organizations have paid internships. So if you're looking for some extra money in the summer while doing that feel-good work, there are paid internships. So really look out for them. And if you have any questions, you can always send me an email and I can send you some lists of them. But also pro bono work, right? There's that alternative summer spring break, that's what it is, that UB offered. And those opportunities help build those relationships. It gets you out there in the community. And there's a lot of these organizations are statewide or they have offices throughout the state. So if you're home in the summer in Western Maryland, there's opportunities there for you as well. So you can volunteer, you can look for those paid internships. You can also contact bar associations. There's a lot of different volunteer opportunities through that as well, because right now, I would say a lot of these organizations are community focused. They are not just staying in the office all day, they're out at libraries, they're out at schools, they're meeting people at food pantries, they're trying to help people where they're located. So really look for those opportunities, and if you need help with it, feel free to send me an email.
That's very generous of you. Kaylin, what are your thoughts? I know you were a very active and involved student when you were at UB. So what advice do you have?
Well, yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, being part of the student organizations provides a lot of opportunity to get that exposure. When I was at UB, I was part of the National Black Law Students Association on the national board. So was Julianne. We served together, and you know that really gave a lot of exposure and allowed you, again, to build that network, but then also to see where the opportunities are, because when you're involved and you're doing that type of work, people want to see you successful and they want to help you out. I want to just piggyback real quickly though on the piece that Julianne talked about. There are paid internships, including at the ACLU of Maryland, which we will be dropping, I think at the end of the month. So just keep an eye on our website. I'm going to be hiring somebody. Please feel free to apply. We're looking forward to somebody. And of course, you know, I got a good, I would love for that person to be from UB.
I would too. If you want the best, go to UB. All right, Randy, like I said, their students, they want to do justice now. They don't want to wait till they pass the bar and start working. So what advice do you have for them?
So similarly, DRM, we offer law student internships that are paid. Unfortunately, the cycle for the summer are already filled, but keep an eye out. We fill them for the fall and spring and next summer. So we're always interested, again, I have a warm spot in my heart for UB. If I saw a UB applicant, I would say in my experience, we haven't received as many at DRM from UB. So I would love to build that relationship more. And I'm always happy to, again, do an informational interview with someone if you're interested in working on issues related to people with disabilities. But, to piggyback on kind of the points that have already been made, other organizations, whether it's something like the Center for Urban Families, there are other organizations that are not necessarily, legal services where you can volunteer your time. They have paid, some of them have paid volunteer opportunities, but also just being part of your community wherever you may live in the state of Maryland. Again, in working, doing this work, I've realized and have been interested in joining certain councils and boards, and expanding that experience that you as students, while while you're still in school, you still have a unique perspective to share in some of these organizations, and kind of looking forward and being part of this community, that you don't have to wait to graduate to join and volunteer and put your voice out there.
Great advice. And a final piece of advice I give, particularly to students watching today, is join UB Spy, because that does indicate to employers and to the legal services community that this is something you're committed to, that you're interested in, and that you've been working toward. So join UB Spy and become a student leader there. All right, so I just want to remind the audience, we welcome your questions, whether it's for all of our panelists or just one or two of our panelists. So please don't be shy. We will read your questions for you. What I want to ask next, and maybe I'll start with Julianne here, is getting to what has been so far the most satisfying experience of your career. I mean, these jobs working towards social justice, goes without saying, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Our clients are suffering from real inequities, discrimination, segregation, and so forth. And it takes a lot of fortitude, to stay the path and really be partners with them as they work to achieve their goals. But despite that, the reason you all do it, the reason I do it, is it can be incredibly satisfying and rewarding. So if you could reflect a little on some of the high points, and I'll ask each of you in turn, I think that would be just really inspirational and informative, particularly for our students in the audience.
Sure. So jokingly, I say my greatest accomplishment has been recruiting my husband from a big firm to public interest work, which, I mean, just welcome to the family officially with that. So that is my joke, but yes, that has been wonderful. Kaylin's cracking up. Okay. So, but in all honesty, working with victims of domestic violence, a lot of their cases are so complicated. There is custody, divorce, there's sometimes a third party involved. I mean, they're far from clean and easy, and they do not end in a timely manner. Like, I've had cases that last years, and being able to find and train and mentor attorneys that have never even thought about being in the courtroom before, to take on these cases so that we can expand representation in this field has been amazing. That has been something where I've seen lives get changed, people be able to walk out of the courtroom feeling free and finally safe. That has been absolutely amazing. I love the fact that there's more attorneys that are willing to step into this field. They have their normal, I would say 9 to 5, but we all know none of us work 9 to 5, but let's say 9 to 5 job. And then they also are willing to dedicate themselves to public interest work. Being able to recruit for that and seeing the increase in the amount of people that are in the courthouse with an attorney and are represented, that is absolutely amazing. And I love seeing that now nationwide, how many more people are doing pro bono. So that's truly where my heart is at.
I think that's such a good reminder for our audience that even if you don't choose, public interest as your full-time career, there are so many pro bono opportunities where you can have a tremendous impact, build on your own legal skills, get additional training. And so it doesn't have to be full-time to change lives. And that's really such a powerful point that Julianne is making. So Randy, let me go to you next. What are your highs as a lawyer in the disability rights movement?
So I'm going to talk about two experiences. One, I worked with a couple where really everywhere they turned, the door was kind of closed on them because their legal issue, it was a Medicaid issue, and it was very technical, and not many legal service providers provide representation in Medicaid cases. Theirs was unique that it took a lot of hours and to really prepare for a hearing for their case, and being successful in it after months of investigation, months of requesting medical records, medical bills to show that this couple who was living in poverty, were financially eligible for the program that we were representing them to access benefits in, and then seeing them have that relief, that financial relief of being able to get the coverage for their outstanding medical bills and accessing services was a high. I mean, getting that decision after months and months, they had essentially had the Department of Social Services shut the door in their face several times over several years. So those individual cases where you just, your clients, for whatever reason, all of your clients speak to you, but really situations where you know that if you didn't assist them, they would not be able to get assistance anywhere else. Also, it's taking on an issue and seeing a need for advocacy and working with your network to come to, getting a solution, I think. So one issue was a nursing facility issue where really the state of Maryland wasn't in compliance with the federal regulations in regards to discharge planning, and kind of being that squeaky wheel of bringing it up as, to different coalitions, to different groups, and then at hearings making those legal arguments. So we were at Legal Aid for this one issue, we were kind of anyone who would listen to us to make the argument, to bring up the issue, and then finally in the legislative session, there was a bill to amend the regulations to come into compliance. So it was making sure that kind of addressing the issue from all points and then coming to a resolution, and knowing that now nursing home residents are going to be, receive a discharge location upon discharge if it actually happens, which is so key in ensuring a safe and secure discharge. So, sometimes it's that broader work where you might be advocating on individual cases, but you're looking at the big picture and moving the ball forward.
Right. There are so many ways to effectuate change. Kaylin, let me turn to you. What are the highs like for a legislative lawyer? I know you're probably coming off a bit of a high after this General Assembly session, but as you look back on your career so far, what stands out for you?
Yeah, well, anytime you get the bill passed, that's already going to be a high, especially when there's a lot of fight and a lot of turmoil. So, to your point, passing police reform this year was tremendous, and the amount of work and long hours. We talk about work-life balance. That legislative session is not a work-life balance until, well, it is now that it's over, but before it wasn't. So getting that done is a tremendous high. So I'm on one right now, to be clear. But also when I think about, since leaving UB, the first bill that I actually got passed was one banning the use of solitary confinement on kids that are incarcerated. We see solitary confinement as torture, is the way we see it. And, so being able to, when you're in law school, it's a lot of focus on court and litigation and kind of what happens after the fact, after something has happened. And in legislation, you get the opportunity to try to change things before it happens, or to try to adjust the situation so that way you get different outcomes. And so that's one piece of legislation that I was excited about. But then also when I think about, doing work in the city council, it's also the opportunity to run into your friends and even your old professors, like Professor Lee. I just worked on Water Accountability and Equity Act with her. So, these are the types of opportunities that occur. You never know who you're going to run into. And every time you run into somebody and you're able to work with them as a professional now, it's always fun.
All right. I think we have time for one more question before I turn it over to Cooper. Does that sound right, Cooper?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, so there are a couple questions getting to something Caitlin just alluded to. How do you manage the stress of your jobs? You have a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. This is important work. And how do you maintain a work-life balance? And as Caitlin pointed out, sometimes you don't, but that's usually temporary and it passes. So any thoughts or advice you have for students thinking about this line of work? Caitlin, I'll start with you and then we'll move on from there.
Yeah, if you're thinking about legislation, and in particular state level legislation, you're going to be focused on legislative session, which is from January to April, a heavy, intense 90 days. And listen, you're going to have to put everything aside for legislative session. But understand that as soon as session is over, the entire industry goes on vacation for about 2 months. So you get that same reprieve as well. But then, of course, also as you're dealing with, and I think there's another question in the chat that talks about that emotional stress as well. You really always want to pace yourself, even in the midst of those tough times, and you still want to be able to get rest. I mean, there's an old saying that you can't make music without rest. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of noise. And so you want to make sure that you're still putting that into it, even in the toughest times, even when you've got those 12 to 14-hour days. And again, you're going to need it because even though you know it's only 3 months, I mean, you can still run into burnout, and you want to try to avoid that as best possible. And that is necessary indeed, so that way you can best represent and effectuate change for the folk that you're working for.
Right. You can't do a good job if you're frazzled and stressed out. So part of the job is managing the stress. Randy, what are your thoughts and advice?
Yeah, so the case I had mentioned earlier about my Medicaid clients, I always think about myself at 2 a.m. making copies for my hearing the next day, because I literally the night before got a dump of information that I needed to prepare and include. So yes, there are those nights that you're gonna be working late, you're gonna be preparing, but there's a balance. I mean, at legal aid and DRM, I've had the fortunate opportunity to work on great teams where people who are happy to kind of do case consults, to talk about issues, and sometimes just vent and talk about, our experiences and our cases. So it's that balance of, being able to sometimes know that this is temporary, this is one case amongst a case list, and balancing that and realizing, today's 2 a.m. is tomorrow's 4 p.m., like whatever that balance may be during your week. At DRM, we work, we're required to only work 35 hours a week. Of course, we work much more than that. So sometimes it is, making that balance for yourself, relying on your team, and sometimes having to ask for assistance, whatever that may look like. Someone second chairing, someone assisting in your investigation or prep for a particularly complex case. I think it's always better, you have to remember this is your license, when you're practicing. So, being able to stop sometimes, and if you are struggling, communicate that. It's not, this is, a marathon of public interest and your career. You don't want to burn out. You're going to have highs and lows, but communicating your needs and asking for help. There's been times where I've had to ask for help or ask, whatever that may be, whether it's asking for another attorney or an intern, a law clerk, whatever that may be, to assist.
Yeah, great advice. Julianne, what are your thoughts? How do you manage the stress? How do you have a work-life balance with a family? What are your secrets?
Don't have a kid. No. I will say someone really wise just told me that self-care is healthcare. And that's really true, because I have a hard cutoff time at the end of the day. I will say I'm not doing any work past this time. And it changes every day, but I make sure there's a time when I just close the computer and that's it. Mostly because I have a little kid. So I have my son and I want to spend time with him. I have my husband, I want to spend time with him. And I can't just keep running and expect to just be okay. There needs to be a cutoff time. And the other thing that I found really helpful is when you work in this public interest world, you end up creating these little groups of friends. And especially at UB, I think the majority of my friends now are from UB. And we have these little group chats. And you might put in the group chat, like, there's this win. I saw this great thing today. And it could be something legal or non-legal. But it's just a great time to remember that we're all humans. We all need to just feel good and check in with each other and say hello. And I know I have that. I know my husband has one with Kaylin. Like, we all are kind of connected here and supporting each other and making sure that everybody's okay. So I think create that group of support. And also just remember, you need to turn off as well. You need to recharge. So set a time and take that time for yourself.
Great advice. Drawing boundaries and maintaining your friendships are so important. So I want to thank our panelists for sharing your experiences with us and your excellent advice. I'm going to turn the proceedings over to Cooper right now because he has some really exciting announcements about opportunities that UB students will be doing this summer. So Cooper, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Professor Gilman, and thank you, Randy, Julianne, and Kaylin, for a very insightful and informative discussion. It's been great to work with each of you facilitating this webinar. To close, UB Spy would like to congratulate our incoming fellows. These 13 students have applied and been selected through a competitive process to serve full-time in a public interest with a public interest legal employer for 10 weeks over the summer. Together, they will complete over 5,000 hours of legal work for their organizations. Please join me in congratulating Caitlin O'Dowd, who's going to go on to work for the Maryland Office of the Public Defender in the Juvenile Division for Baltimore City. Davida Mohandejo, who's going to work for Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service. Alexandria Hodge, who will work with the Maryland Office of the Attorney General in the Maryland Department of Education. Oranitza Abbas, who's going to go on to work for the Maryland Office of the Public Defender for Baltimore City. Amanda Daly, she's going to work with the State's Attorney's Office for Baltimore City. Braden Sintar, who's also going to work for the Baltimore City Office of the Public Defender. Kyle Kerwin, who's going to work for the Baltimore City Public Defender as well. They're lucky this year; they get so many UB students. Faith Zellman, who's going to work with the State's Attorney's Office for Baltimore City. Ernesto Villaseñor Jr., who's going to work for the Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County. Have fun on the West Coast. Anne Marie Marceliano, who's going to work for Casa de Maryland. And finally, not pictured, but also receiving fellowships are Vidi Kumar, who's going to work for the Community Legal Services of Prince George's County. Megan Nally, who's going to work for Senior Legal Services, and Amelia Bradshaw with the St. Ambrose Housing Aid Center. Congratulations to each of our fellows, and thank you for all attending this event. Please see the materials from our panelists for more information on how you can get involved with public interest work. And students, please be on the lookout for an email from me regarding UB Spy's 2021 to 22 Executive Board elections. Thank you again for coming. Have a great evening.